Share screen. And play. All right, Patty, could you give me a thumbs up that there's nothing else on the screen except for the books of Samuel? Great. No little random window open. Okay. So today we're talking about the first and second Samuel. We got a head start on Samuel, if you recall, from last week. So if you missed last week, we are not talking about the first 8 chapters of Samuel because those are interesting and they can get kind of left out if we didn't kind of put those with Ruth, because there's so much that we're going to cover here. So reminder that first and second Samuel, they used to be, they're kind of always seen as one book. The scrolls were not long enough, so they had to separate it into 2 parts. Now, there is a natural stopping point that we get to at the end of First Samuel, but it is it's just too long. The scrolls could not handle that much data, like a CD or a cassette tape or a record can only hold so much data. As I was talking about, I'm a fan of the band Chicago, and many of their early albums were double record sets. And then you could buy them on one CD because they all fit onto one CD. And now, if you listen to them on Spotify or YouTube, it's just one big playlist and doesn't necessarily separate it out into the discs that existed before. So the only reason that there were the 2 records was because they had enough music that it couldn't fit onto one. So there's enough information here in the books of Samuel that couldn't just fit into one scroll. So it was called First and Second Samuel, but always conceived to be one album, like Chicago 2 or Chicago 3 are one album, but they just are separated into different discs. So it does make sense for us to look at the whole rather than doing one class on First Samuel and one class on Second Samuel. I'm not doing that for a couple of reasons. One, it would take forever to get through the Bible, and it makes sense just to kind of see them as a whole unit. But I have separated them into a little bit because there are some themes there that fit into First Samuel and into Second Samuel. So I'm gonna just kind of go through each one and talk about the major characters that we see. I can't cover everything, and then the supporting cast, major points, and then some other episodes that I find are interesting for us to consider, if not major plot points or major pieces to the story. They are still interesting episodes that are good to read even on their own. I would also say that, well, I won't say that yet. So first of all, we have Samuel, of course, who we saw last week, who kind of starts off the book, and that's the name of the book is after him. He is the final judge. Well, his sons are kind of those judges too, but they're disasters. Which, as you recall, that's where we left off last time, and that's one of the reasons the kingship came about. Saul, who is the first king of Israel, and David, who is the rival king or the rival person to Saul, in some ways kind of Saul's nemesis throughout First Samuel. We have a supporting cast here in First Samuel. Jonathan, who is the son of Saul and the friend of David, which makes for some complicating things because Saul and David have troubles getting along. Goliath, he's that big guy. We'll get to that. And then Abigail is the wife of David, or rather one of the wives of David. Because remember, in the Old Testament times, it gets really confusing. The whole idea of marriage is a very different one. And again, Here's an important principle to remember. Just because it happens in the Bible does not mean it is endorsed by God, or it is the way that we are called to live now. I don't know of anybody that would say, I don't know of anybody, there might be some people that say, well, David had many wives in the Bible, therefore I should have many wives. That's not the way it works. It's just the way that the society was, and a lot of it was wrapped up into the kingship and organizing with lands and everything like that. So it was, there were a lot of pieces there, but Abigail is one of David's wives. So those are the major characters and the supporting cast, the major supporting cast that we see in 1 Samuel. So if you're wondering, yeah, okay, who is this book about? It's about primarily Samuel, Saul, and David, and also these other folks. So we have some major themes here. First of all, God did not choose Saul. That is mentioned several times. So if we go into our Bible, recall where we were last week, that Samuel was displeased when they asked for a king. So I'm in chapter 8, verse 6. Samuel was displeased when they asked for a king. The Lord, however, answered, grant the people's every request. It is not you they reject. They are rejecting me as their king. So Saul gets really chosen by the people. And that's that is an interesting piece. If we go to chapter 10, okay, so chapter 10, verse 17 and following, Samuel called the people together to the Lord at Mizpah. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who brought Israel out from Egypt and delivered you from the power of the Egyptians and from the power of the kingdoms that oppressed you. But today you have rejected your God. Let's get this clarified. This is not my idea. You have rejected the Lord your God, who delivers you from all your evils, not kings. That's what the other nations do. I am your king, God says. But you said, now you must appoint a king over us. So since you want it, I'll give it to you. Here you go. So take your stand before the Lord according to tribes and families. So since Samuel has all the tribes come forward, and they finally chose Saul, son of Kish. He is hiding among the baggage. They ran to bring him from there, and then we stood among the people. He was head and shoulders above the people, which I think is really interesting. That why is Saul chosen as the king? Because he was tall and handsome, and he looked like a king. He looked the part. Therefore, he was the one that was chosen, not because he was holy, but because he was, he looked good and he looked the part. Does that sound familiar? Sometimes we might have our politicians that we elect. It's not necessarily because they are really particularly qualified, but they're attractive, and they've got a nice speaking style or whatever. That often is the case. There was an interesting thing. I watched a documentary. Now, admittedly, this is before my time, but when the television was first starting to come along, and there was the debates between, I think it was Kennedy and I'm gonna have to maybe unmute you for a second here. Come on now. It must be a Saturday morning. All right. All right, let me unmute you for a second. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. All right. Well, yeah, text that and then show it to the screen here, Patty. Then what's the name of the guy? What's the name of the guy? Anyway, Kennedy was the really attractive one. and the other guy was not. You know, the guy that was impeached and removed from office, whatever that guy's name is, this guy, whoever that is, I can't come up with his name at the moment. You know, the most famous president like ever. I am not a crook. Not that guy. Anyway, he was sweating like crazy in the thing, and he was not comfortable, and that really kind of hurt his the debate style. So you all know who I'm talking about. I can't figure out how to unmute you all. Anyway, in that style, they chose Kennedy. The Kennedy won the debate, not necessarily because, at least that's what the documentary is saying, but because he was more appealing and he looked better. So similarly, and again, I'm not taking any sides. I'm just saying all that mattered was what he looked like. And so all that mattered in the kingship for Saul was the fact that he looked good and he looked the part and he was tall. And the people said, that's the one we want. So Saul is selected as the first king, not because of his qualifications, but because of the way he looked. Oops. Saul is another major theme that we have here in this time is Saul is jealous and he is reckless. Saul is a disaster pretty much from day one. He's a good military leader in some ways, but then he also gets really preoccupied with jealousy and especially in contrast to David. He sees David as this great challenge. So one of the themes, it's kind of an overarching theme in 1 Samuel, is it looks like the first time we see it is in chapter 18, where chapter 18, verse 7, which says, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Saul goes, what? They only let me slay thousands and David gets 10,000s? So Saul was very angry and resentful of the song. They gave David 10,000s, only thousands to me. All that remains for him is the kingship. And from that day on, Saul was jealous of David. So that is a major theme, that Saul is jealous and reckless. In contrast to David is faithful and merciful. So the contrast between Saul and David is one of the major themes that we see going on in 1 Samuel. David is presented as, at least in 1 Samuel, as a good, noble, honest person, in contrast to Saul, who is not. Oh, that's what I did. I forgot to put all these. I forgot to put up my transitions between all the slides. Oh, I was going to look so unprofessional. But anyway, major plot points here that we have that happen. Okay, so Saul, first of all, he is elected, or he's made king. The lot fell to him. So that is in chapter 9 and 10. There we have that he becomes the king. Okay, another plot point is Saul fights a bunch of bad guys. So there's a lot of running around and beating getting into fights and quarrels with the neighboring nations. That's something I think, Patty, you brought up a couple weeks ago about the importance of that I think that they bring up in the Bible timeline of completely rooting out the enemies. And there's a lot of fighting in this. I'll get to the violentometer in just a second, but there's a lot of fighting that goes on. But if we read that on a spiritual level, the idea is, as we read this, is if we don't root out evil in our lives completely, it comes back up again. Using the dandelion image again, if you just take off the head of the dandelion, doesn't do you any good. It's going to grow right back. So you go and you maybe just take out the king. Well, now the king's son is going to be angry with you, because you killed his king. He's going to build up resentment for 20 years. Now he's going to come back and attack you again. So it's very shocking to us modern readers and hard for us to stomach when we hear people going in and slaughtering the kings and all the citizens and their wives and their sons. Just think of that in a spiritual level is the most helpful way for us to think of it as moderns, is if we just take off the surface level of the sin and don't get to the core, the root of the problem, it's going to come back and rear its ugly head again later, because we have not got to the bottom of the matter and healed it from the very bottom, and that then will bring us full healing. So someone might, come to confession and say gossiping. I gossiped against my coworker. And so you might say, well, okay, I'm going to stop gossiping. Well, okay, good. But what's going on down there deeper? Is there jealousy? Is there frustration from your past? What is the root of that sin? What really needs to get worked out? What is there? Loneliness? Is there lack of trust in God? Is there insecurities? What's going on? If you just say, I'm not going to gossip, well, it's going to come back up again. You got to figure out what is going on in the depths. And so that's when we read a lot of the Old Testament, we hear these things about slaughtering entire populations. That's very unsettling. But just think of it in terms of sin and of bad guys. I put bad guys but they're all children of God, right? But I think again, it's also helpful for us to, because it was real black and white. But I watch television shows or movies all the time that have the bad guys, and I've mentioned Star Wars. I'm not really all that concerned about every stormtrooper that gets shot. They're the bad guys, and you just got to take them down. And if you don't take down all the stormtroopers, well, then you're going to lose. You got to, or you watch these superhero shows, and there's all these minions or whatever that come along, and there's always the superhero who gets rid of all the bad minions, and they punch them down and they shoot their webs or whatever. That's I think it's helpful for us to kind of read the Old Testament like those adventure stories or whatever, where we don't necessarily get worried about the person's soul, or wait a minute, that's a child of God as well. Just kind of want to bracket that, I think, as we read the Old Testament, that they would read these in the same ways that we might be watching or reading an adventure movie or a superhero movie. Because they didn't have superhero shows or whatever. This was also a story for them to hear about the power of God. Now, what happens to all those souls? Are they all children of God? Yes. What happens to them? We just leave that up to God. So we just kind of bracket that. And we have to do that sometimes when we read Old Testament readings or even New Testament readings. We have to kind of bracket things that we have problems with or that we have questions about. Some people ask about where did everybody come from when we look back in Genesis? And this is a little bit of a side note, but when we look at Genesis and we hear about Adam and Eve's sons, and then they had their wives, people say, wait a minute, where'd the wives come from? And the best answer I have to that is the Bible just goes along and just doesn't answer that question. They're all fine with it. And so that should be what we say too, is like, well, the Bible doesn't care. I guess I won't care. It's not that big of a deal. We'll let God all figure that out, because it's all kind of speculation. Well, were they also children? Would we have this kind of inbreeding at the beginning? Is that what happened? Or were there other tribes? Did God create others? We kind of bracket that and just say that's not the point that's going on right now. And so with all of the Old Testament stuff, we have to think, okay, that's not the point going on right now. We're not talking about all of us being children of God. We're talking about the power and the majesty of God. That's the focus that we're going to focus in on here. And that's when when God is taking over the Holy Land, when we come into Jerusalem, and I was like, there's people there already. Why are we kicking them out? Our modern sense might think of like modern things of like Europeans coming over and colonizing and kicking out all the Native Americans, and like, well, there it is, it's right there in the Bible, whatever. We want to bracket all those kinds of thoughts that our modern minds might ask, but and remember what the original intention of the author is that this is the gift from God, and this is being given, the promised land, to the promised people. And we have these other problems that we are asking, but that's not the intent of the book. And so we don't want to put into the book those other thoughts that we might have. They're good, and those are good things to pray about, but we just want to remember the original intent. So Saul fights bad guys. So this is the big, probably the most famous part of Samuel is that David fights Goliath. Now, I will have to compare here, but that's in chapter 17. So chapter 17 is David fighting Goliath. And he is from the land of the town of Gath. He's a Philistine, and from the city of Gath. Just remembering that. Now, my Bible says, I have to compare. Let me compare here because I didn't get a chance to check in the Revised Standard. But what does it say in 17 here? 17, chapter 4. Okay. So in the New American Bible, it says that Goliath is 6.5 feet tall. 6.5 feet tall. In the Revised Standard, it says 6 cubits and a span. So, I don't know about measurements, but when we first read 6.5, when you think of a giant, David going to slaughter the giant, I'm thinking like he's like 20 feet tall, he's like huge. I don't remember. I was going to look up how big Andre the Giant was, but I'm pretty sure he was taller than 6.5 feet. 6.5 feet. That's like short in the NBA or something. So it seems like when I think of a giant, like 6.5. But again, I think we've gotten taller as the centuries have gone along. I think that's part of the evolution of humanity. But when I was reading that 6.5, really, that's it. We can take down that guy. That's not that big. But so don't be too disalarmed, and maybe that's a mistranslation, because I was just talking to seminarian John. He said that they measured out the cubits or whatever, that it would be like 9 feet or something like that. But anyway, he was tall according to the other standards. He was big and he was threatening, and he was this big guy. But I remember when I was a kid, I was thinking like giant, like Jack and the Beanstalk giant. That's what I remember thinking. But he was a big guy. And David takes down Goliath. If we know one story from 1 Samuel, we know this story. David takes the sling, throws it, the rock gets lodged in his head, and he goes down. And David says, the battle belongs to our God. It's not David's power, it's God's power. And that's a defining theme of 1 and 2 Samuel, that is the power of God that does anything good. So there he is. He's throwing that rock there. And then during 1 Samuel, Saul is chasing David all over the place because he's jealous of David. He doesn't want him taking over the power of the kingship. He's and that becomes, as you read 1 Samuel, you see a whole lot of the running around of Saul chasing David. And it can kind of get like, it can kind of seem a little bit much. But again, think of it like an adventure story or a superhero or whatever. You got the good guy chasing the bad guy all around, or the bad guy chasing the good guy all around. That's just kind of how those stories work. And that's a helpful way for us to think of 1 Samuel. And then at the end of 1 Samuel, that's where Saul dies, as do his 3 sons. It's a very tragic day for Israel, as those 3 die. Man, those transitions, I forgot to put them in. I wish I did. Okay. And then worthwhile episodes to remember. So what are some other things that happen in Samuel, that are, I think, good for us to recall, to remember? I mean, of course, Goliath, of course, these major plot points. But other than that, what are some other things that maybe aren't major plot points, but are worthwhile for us to consider? One of these is in chapter 21, is when David eats the holy bread. Okay. So in chapter 21, David went to Ahimelech, the priest of Nob. Why are you alone? Is there no one with you? David answered, the priest, the king gave me a commission, told me that to let no one know anything about the business on which he sent me. So now what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves or whatever you can find. I have no ordinary bread on hand, but only the holy bread. And so the priest gave him the holy bread, for no other bread was on hand except for the showbread, which had been removed from the Lord's presence. So there was the connection there of that holy bread. And Jesus makes reference to this in the gospel. If you look on your footnotes, where Jesus says his disciples were eating grain. Have you not heard about the time where David went to the temple to eat the holy bread, which only the priests could lawfully eat? And so he's using this example. This is where it happens right here in 1 Samuel. And there is, of course, the connection to the Eucharist of the showbread, and the Eucharist and the monstrance, that ancient Jewish idea that there is the holy bread. So the idea of the Eucharist being holy bread, and not just at the Mass. There was kind of a heresy that, talked about, that's the presence that matters here in the moment, but then it somehow ceases to become the holy bread afterwards. Well, that's not, of course, what we teach as Catholics, and that's why we have worship of the Blessed Sacrament. So there's that Old Testament connection there. As I was working on my sealing, I was doing some more listening to Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist, which is a book I would highly recommend. It is great. Unfortunately, because I was listening to it as an audiobook, the problem with audiobooks is it's really hard to go back and check notes. What did it say there? So it's like, now I need to rewind that. So they're great to listen to, but they're a little bit hard to revisit. So I wish I could provide the page number and everything that I was here, that he was talking directly about this passage. It's late in the book that he's talking about the showbread, or the bread of the presence. But it's really, really good. If you have any doubts about the connection of the Eucharist to our Jewish faith, or if you have Protestant brothers and sisters who say, Eucharist is not biblical or whatever, or this really goes through things really, really well. It's a great, great book. And he also has something about Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary. So these are very helpful books, I think, especially in our Catholic and Protestant conversations that sometimes Catholics don't seem to understand, myself included. I mean, y'all people, you don't understand. I learned a lot from this thing, and we tend not to have the ability to say, when someone challenges us, why do you worship Mary, or why do you have the Eucharist? Why do you have a monstrance? Why are you all coming up there and kneeling before a piece of bread? And it's like, well, no, it's not just a piece of bread. It's Jesus. And actually that goes back to the Old Testament. So Brant Pitre is not defending the Eucharist from really Catholic theology so much, or from the New Testament even. He's saying, look, all these things that are happening that we still do today have their roots way back in the Old Testament, in the way that things were done before Jesus. So I strongly recommend both of those books, Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist, and the Jewish Roots of Mary by Brant Pitre. Again, I would quote that directly, but I don't know It's on the audio book, so I don't have a physical copy of that book, but it was really good to listen to while I was working on my ceiling and when I was driving. Back when I used to drive a car, I would sometimes turn that on. I've driven so little in this time. I think I've filled up my tank one time since March or something like that. Maybe twice. I did go to see my mom 2 times in Topeka, once for her birthday and once for Mother's Day. And I saw my sister in Lawrence. That's about all I've traveled in the past 3 months. It's really bizarre. So another episode here is David. David, again, he's the merciful one. He is the one that does not attack Saul. It's Saul that keeps on coming after him, and he's trying to have to escape over and over again from the treachery of Saul. But in chapter 24, there's several examples of David having the chance to kill Saul, but he doesn't. So chapter 24 is one of those. David went up from there and stayed in the refuges behind En-Gedi. Saul returned for the pursuit of the Philistines. He was told that David was in the desert there near En-Gedi. Blah, blah, blah. When he came to the sheepfolds along the way, he found a cave when he entered to ease nature. I love the way the Bible talks about these things sometimes. He went to ease nature. David and his men were occupying the inmost recesses of the cave, and then said, "This is the day which the Lord said to you, I will deliver your enemy into your grasp. Do with him as you see fit." So David moved up and stealthily cut off the end of Saul's mantle. And he kind of regretted that he even did that. But then he says, look, I could have killed you. Here's proof. I just cut off your mantle. I had every power to kill you, but I didn't. I was merciful. Please stop chasing me all around. I'm not your enemy. I'm not going to kill you. But he does not, he still comes after him because the guy's kind of crazy. And then here's that picture that I got down here. Saul goes to see the witch of Endor, not to be confused with the Ewok place. But he gets specific. You have specific instructions, and Saul in chapter 28 goes and clears out all the fortune tellers and the mediums out of the land in chapter 28. And then Saul wants to go and see a medium because he wants to talk to Samuel, who just died a couple chapters before. He needs to go visit him because he's not getting any guidance from God. He needs to call upon his old friend Samuel, who anointed him as king. And so he goes to see the witch of Endor, and she conjures up Samuel. It's really, there are some really great cinematic moments here. This is one of the great cinematic moments where Saul goes to see a witch, and the witch brings back Samuel from death. It's a pretty crazy scene, but this is obviously displeasing to God. And if there is any question about whether we should go to see, tarot readers or hand readers or any of those things that we see on those streets sometimes, do not do those things. We are not; that's not the method that God has given us. We are not to engage in those kinds of occult practices. So anyway, there is this. It shows the further depravity of Saul. That it's kind of the unthinkable. I have never once been tempted to go into one of those storefronts that say hand reading, tarot readers, and all those neon signs. Never once have I been tempted to go into one of those places. And because I know that that's a serious crime against God. Don't mess with those kinds of things. And so how bad did Saul get? He went so bad that he goes to see a witch. And so that's how bad things have gotten for Saul. So Saul is pretty much a disaster in the as a king. So one thing after another. Now he does have his shining moments, and he is taking down the Philistines and doing these other things. And he repents, and it's just in the cycle, right? he's doing these things, and he's okay. I'm going to be better. Okay, I'm not going to hurt David. I'm not. And then his jealousy rises up again, and then he's like, "Oh, I need to take down David." But see, there's kind of that theme of Samuel, right? That we see it played out kind of it's really kind of brilliant. Well, it's a brilliance. It's scripture, right? So there's two things going on in Samuel. Not only are we attacking the enemies from without, Saul has these enemies from within, which he's not getting to the bottom of and rooting them out, of putting his total faith in God, of rooting out that jealousy that he has of David. You need to get down to the bottom and take all that stuff out. And what's the result if you don't? Well, we see it. It's a disaster for the kingdom. It's a disaster for him personally. Everything collapses. So when you have those enemies, you have to go after them and you have to eliminate them completely. That's kind of the theme from without and from within. So that is pretty much 1 Samuel. So here's kind of a map of what's going on. You've got Israel and you've got Judah and you've got the various battles and the attacks that are going on. I like the title, Michmash, the battle at Michmash up there in the northeast there of the map. There's a land of the Philistines. There's Gath. Oh, I was going to mention that in chapter 27, David goes and he hides among the Philistines over there. And I like this line from chapter 27, verse 4. It says, when Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. I think that's kind of funny because why did Saul not go to Gath? Well, that's from Goliath was from. And so it's like, all right, you're good. Stay over there. I'll leave you over there. I'm not going to Gath. I know what kind of people they raise them big up there in Gath. So I'm not going to go and mess with Gath. So that is pretty much then 1 Samuel. So part 1 is mostly about Saul, a lot about his jealousy, a lot about David's faithfulness. I didn't talk too much also about the relationship there, that David is a good friend with Jonathan, and Jonathan and David have a great friendship. Again, Jonathan is the son of Saul, one of the people that is killed at the end of the book. His 3 sons are killed. But David has a good friendship there with Jonathan and the support. So Jonathan is kind of caught in the middle, both with his friendship with Jonathan and his fidelity to his dad, Saul. So there's another theme that I just can't go into everything when we're trying to cover both of these books in an hour-ish. So, but that's another interesting piece about that friendship that we have, and it's a beautiful story of the friends of David and Jonathan. And then we get into the extent of David's kingdom that is less. So let's take a little spin on the violence-o-meter here we'll take a pause here. So this is kind of 1st and 2nd Samuel. Where does it fit? Oh, tick, 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 tick. I would go up to a 9. Maybe not quite as violent as Judges, but there's a whole lot of slaughtering going on. So, okay. So then we shall move on to, see, I had a nice transition there. I forgot to put the transitions in the rest of them, but oh well. So now we go on to 2 Samuel. So again, let's talk about our major characters of 2 Samuel. Obviously, Saul nor Samuel figure into 2 Samuel because they're both dead. So David, he is our king. He is the main character of 2 Samuel, without a doubt. So yeah, 2 Samuel is the book of David, basically, you could say. Then Nathan, who is a prophet, and Absalom, David's son. I would say those are the 3 major characters that we hear about in 2 Samuel. David, who is the king, Nathan, who is the prophet, and Absalom, who is David's son, who is not always the greatest. Always the greatest son throughout the story of 2 Samuel. And then we have our supporting cast. Joab, who appears a lot in this book. He is the military commander to David, completely faithful to David. There's a lot of names, and as I found as I was reviewing over these books, it's hard to keep straight now who is who and who is the son. Even though it reminds us often, it's really, it is admittedly hard to keep all the names straight. And I kept on trying to figure out which one is Joab. Does he go with Saul? Does he go with David? But Joab is a faithful military commander to David. Yeah, he's like his general, his big general who carries out a lot of the military campaigns for him. Bathsheba, well, we know about Bathsheba probably, one of the wives of David. We'll go into that. And Ishbaal, who is the king of Israel, son of Saul. Notice, what's in a name. I forget what Ish means, but Baal, that's not a good name to have if you're a Jewish person, because that means you are like a son of Baal. It might be like son of Baal, the gods of the surrounding people. So if you've got a name, Ishbaal, not necessarily a great Jewish name. Yeah. I mean, not entirely. So I hesitate saying this a little bit, but we don't name many of our sons and daughters Mohammed, for instance, because there's an implication. Well, Mohammed, that's kind of a Muslim name, right? So Baal is not really a Jewish name. It's of a different kind of origin. So again, nothing against our Islamic brothers or sisters, but that's kind of the same kind of thing as that's not a normal name that we give to our folks. Okay, so those are the main people that we're going to see in the book. There are others, obviously, but when I was trying to narrow it down to the bare most important, those are who I'd say is the most important. Okay, major themes. So the faithfulness to God results in blessings, and unfaithfulness to God results in bad consequences. So David, for the first part of 2 Samuel, is faithful to God, and God blesses him, and the kingdom is blessed. And there's great examples of him ruling as a good king. There is a turning point, which we will talk about, where things get a little bad. So major plot points. What happens in the second book of Samuel? So first of all, David becomes the king of Judah, and that is in chapter 4. Chapter 2. So David becomes the king of Judah. Now, I also think that chapter 1 is interesting too. It really feels, even though it's one book, it does feel like a second episode or a sequel as you enter into this next thing. And maybe it's just because there is the break of 1 and 2 Samuel, but it does feel like a new break. And this report comes and says that that this person killed Saul out of mercy because he was dying. So I slaughtered him for you, and here is his crown. He's actually not telling the truth if you read the first book of Samuel, because Saul took his sword and fell upon it. That's what it says in the first book of Samuel. But then this other guy, I guess does not have a name. This other guy comes and reports that he killed him because he was dying. He slaughtered him, and here's the thing. and he thought he was going to be rewarded. Look, I mercifully took out your enemy who is dying, and here is his crown. And David says, I do not appreciate that, and kills him. Which again, that doesn't seem like a merciful and kind thing for our King David to do in the beginning of this book, but what it's meant to stress is his continual fidelity to Saul. He was the anointed of God. Like it or not, and chosen or not, Saul was anointed. He was the anointed person of God. And so he was not going to harm him. And so someone that does harm him, and even though he says it was an act of mercy, I was doing it because he was dying, David does not appreciate that. And how dare you take out the anointed of God? So the consequences of hurting someone who is anointed was severe. So the point of the first part of this 2 Samuel is David remained really faithful and good to King Saul, even though Saul was terrible to him. He, for his part, said, I will not hurt you. So then David is crowned king of Judah. And then David, after that, is crowned king of Judah and Israel, and that's in chapter 5. So we hear about Ishbaal, who is the king of Israel. He is the son of Saul, and David becomes king of Judah and Israel. Now, I think this often gets forgotten or confused that there were two kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. So first of all, David was the king of Judah. And then he was made the king of both Judah and Israel. And that did not last for long, that there was this united kingdom. I think it expires actually with this. I haven't gotten to Kings yet, but I think that it expires in Solomon, that the kingdom becomes divided, or right after Solomon. So David is king of the whole place, but not at first. He first is just the king of Judah. So there was kind of the expectation that Judah and Israel were two different separate kingdoms, but David is really the exception that has united the two kingdoms. And so I think sometimes we get sloppy in our language, I certainly do, about talking about the kingdom of Israel. Well, there were two kingdoms. It was the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. So there were two. David, first of all, was the king of Judah, and then he became the king of Israel. So major things happen here with David becomes the king. He becomes the one king, and then he comes to Jerusalem, to the city of David, also called Zion. So he takes Jerusalem. He then brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. It spends 3 months in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. He was there for 3 months. Now, Carol, you were on the pilgrimage as well. I remember something that Mike Scherzlik said, and maybe I don't remember how well you remember your notes, but I remember there was a beautiful connection of the Ark of the Covenant coming and being in a land, being in a house for 3 months. And I remember Mike Scherzlik pointing across the way that's the land, that's Obed-Gittim or something, or Obed-Edom. And that connection of the Ark of the Covenant remaining for 3 months. So we'll remember how long Mary remained with Elizabeth, 3 months, right? And so that connection of the Ark of the Covenant, that Mary really becomes the new Ark of the Covenant, that it's intentional there to mention that she remained at Elizabeth's house for 3 months. I believe that this is a connection also to the Ark of the Covenant spending 3 months at Obed-Edom. So I'd have to review my notes, and maybe when I unmute you again, Carol, you can offer if you remember anything about that as well. But that was really, really interesting. I'd never heard that before. But that connection of the Ark of the Covenant spending this time here and then going to Jerusalem. So the Ark of the Covenant then goes to Jerusalem. And this is one of people's favorite parts of the Old Testament as well, in chapter 6 of 2 Samuel. When it was reported to King David that the Lord had blessed the family of Obed-Edom and all that belonged to him, David went to bring the ark of God up from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David and festivities. As soon as the bearers of the ark of the Lord had advanced 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. Then David, girt with a linen apron, came dancing before the Lord with abandon. And he and all of the Israelites were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts of joy and sounds of the horn. People love talking about how David was dancing with the ark, and we would love to know what that dancing looked like, I suppose, but he was just so filled with joy. And sometimes people talk about, why can't we have more dancing at Mass or whatever? Because, well, David danced, and so shouldn't we also dance? And there's kind of a run there for a while of what's sometimes referred to as liturgical dance in our celebration. I don't know if Good Shepherd ever had any kind of tradition of doing liturgical dance. But my response to why we don't do liturgical dance nowadays is that liturgical dance doesn't offend me as much as a priest as it does as a former dancer, because most of the time liturgical dance is just plumb awful. So and it offends me as a choreographer, like, oh my goodness, I offer you. So it drives me bonkers as a choreographer and a dancer. It's like, this is awful. But also, there is a certain amount of liturgical dance, a certain amount of liturgical movement, just in our processions and the way that we do the swinging of incense and the way that we move in the ceremony, in the Mass itself. There is certainly movement. It's not choreographed movement. And David's dance, I don't think, was choreographed. It was just this beauty of expressing the joy that one has. But I think it still manifests itself hopefully at the Mass sometimes, when we're just so filled with joy and we like, oh, praise be God, or whatever. We just kind of have these reactions that we're just so excited. I imagine that there might be some dancing this Sunday as we finally open up Masses to people coming back into church. Yahoo! I'm going to Mass. I hope that people kind of come into Mass this way because they're so excited to be back in the community and back to receive Jesus on a Sunday. I hope that there is some of that as we enter into Mass. But also that's kind of the procession that happens into the church, and that does connect with David. It's once we start the service, it's something different, but woohoo, I'm so excited. That's beautiful. And we should be doing some of that, but it's not like, it's more spontaneous joy that we find. But also, I also love how the Bible so as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Saul's daughter, Michal, who is Saul, one of David's wives, looked down through the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in his heart. I just love that, because isn't that the reaction of the wife who was watching her husband go nuts or whatever? I'm like, oh my Lord, David, you were embarrassing me. I think it's just so human. It's like, stop, don't stop. You gotta. So that reaction of the wife watching from the window and being embarrassed about what her husband is doing, I think that's a great also response the Scripture gives to us. And then she has a word with him, and David explains, I was rejoicing in that the Lord is here. How can I not? And she is displeased, and then God is displeased with her. There's some sort of, you get the impression that it has the same kind of feel that, I don't know if you saw that movie about, I can't remember anybody's names today, but the movie with Walk the Line about, the Man in Black, the guy that sang Folsom Prison, I will think of no names this morning, but that guy, and at least it was as presented in the movie. The wife was really displeased with the Man in Black, and displeased with his whole performing, and just really was guarding and just like, I can't believe this or whatever. That's the first movie that comes to my mind, but there are several other movies that, the guy's trying to do these things and just not approved at all by the wife. That's kind of the same kind of impression that I had as I was reading this, is just this guy is trying to do these things and was highly displeased. Now, I'm not taking any sides on that, but that's just kind of the same feeling I had as I read it. It's displeasure with her husband's activity. So the ark comes to Jerusalem. That's a major piece. And then we hear throughout here of 2 Samuel again, it's about about the way that King David rules during his time. It's about his kingship. And then towards the tail end of the thing, we hear about how Absalom, his son, he's got long hair, which is good. Again, some people love how beautiful he is. So the scripture mentions that several times. And people are attracted to him, and he really starts undermining his dad, King David, and usurps the throne, sits on the throne for, I think it's 2 years there, and wants a kingship for himself. Now, David continues to love his son Absalom, and it's one of the most heartbreaking parts, I think, in 2 Samuel, where in chapter 19, when he hears that Absalom was killed, he cries out, "My son, Absalom, my son, my son. If only I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son." It's a very dramatic mourning part where he loses his son, David, in battle. So then David comes and takes the throne back. We also get in Samuel some sense of David's songwriting abilities. At the end of Samuel and at the beginning of 2 Samuel, we have a couple of musical interludes of Paul's writing. Remember, David's writing. Recall that the Psalms are mostly attributed to King David. So remember, he has in 1 Samuel, talks about how he plays the harp when Saul first meets him. So he's got these songwriting abilities. And many of the Psalms are attributed to David. We get touch of that also in 2 Samuel. At least in the New American, you can kind of see how it's broken up and it's written in just a different style. Worthwhile episodes in to remember. What are some things that are important to remember in 2 Samuel along with these major plot points? In chapter 7, chapter 7 is about the promise of the kingship of David forever. The royal throne will endure forever. Remember that. So it can be hard to overestimate the importance of David for the people of God, for our theology, for his connection to Jesus. So there are many elements where we focus on elements of who Jesus is, and then we tie it to an Old Testament figure, right? Or so we talk about Jesus being the new Adam, or Jesus being the new Moses. So Jesus is the new creation. Even though he's not created, he brings a new creation to the world. Jesus is the new Moses because he brings people out of slavery into freedom. And Jesus is the new David because he is the king. So that kingship of Jesus is the fulfillment of what the kingship is supposed to be. And it's the fulfillment of all these things. So obviously we all know that Adam was not perfect because we have original sin, right? We know that Moses was not perfect because he committed that sin that prevented him from getting into the promised land. We know that David's not perfect because of this scene that we're going to talk about in just a second. all these things, these are not perfect people, but Jesus is the perfection of these things. He's the new creation. He is the new savior. He is the new king. So David is one of these figures of the kingship. And in chapter 7, we have this direct quote that people will remember throughout all of history of the Lord reveals, this is chapter 7, verse 11, the Lord also reveals to you that he will establish a house for you. And when your time comes and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your heir after you, sprung from your loins, and I will make his kingdom firm. It is he who shall build a house for my name, and I will make his royal throne firm forever. I will be a father to him, he will be a son to me. I will withdraw not my favor from him. So this, your house and your kingdom shall endure forever before me. Your throne shall stand firm forever. So that important aspect of the kingdom of God, which comes from David. Remember, Jesus is a descendant of David, who is descendant of Ruth, where we were last week, descendant of David for the royal kingship. So that's an important episode to remember in chapter 7. One of the greatest stories of all time is the story of David and Bathsheba and Uriah. What a great and terrible story that is. That's in chapter 11. And that's when things, so first 10 chapters or so, David is pretty reliable, pretty faithful. He's been faithful to God. And then he makes this really grave error here in chapter 11. So I recommend you reading the story of chapter 11 of David and Bathsheba and Uriah. So in summary, David sees Bathsheba. Remember, that's how you remember. She was taking a bath, right? So she was taking a bath, and David finds her very attractive, and he wants her. And then so he calls for her. She comes back with a great announcement. I'm pregnant, because they have been together, and now she is bearing David's son. Problem is, this is the wife of Uriah, and one of his generals in the army. And then so David, this is not David at his best, because he invites Uriah then to come over to his house and say, hey, come on over for dinner, and then why don't you just go lay with your wife, and just we'll just kind of cover this whole thing up, because it's your son, because she couldn't possibly be pregnant with his son because he is fighting in the army, and they are not having any relations. And then Uriah refuses, and then David tries again, and then finally he does the unthinkable and manages to have Uriah killed, and him not having to take responsibility for it. So it's really, really terrible. I mean, it's sin upon sin upon sin. So he takes what he should not take. He then tries to lie his way out, and then it ends up in basically murder that he doesn't take responsibility for, all those things. So it's bad upon bad upon bad. It's a great story, though. It's one of the greatest stories of the entire Old Testament. And then the interaction then of Nathan the prophet. So we have an interesting also beginning here, and this is an important episode in 2 Samuel, which will set up a lot of the rest of the Bible. A prophet isn't someone who tells the future, but a prophet is someone who speaks on behalf of God, who tells the truth. And so then Nathan tells a parable about this rich man who has this shepherd, and he has all the sheep that he could possibly want, except there's one that he does not have that belongs to somebody else. So he takes this other sheep for his own, and he's making this connection, of course, with Bathsheba and Uriah. This does not belong to you. You should not have it. You have all of the other sheep. You have all of the other women. You have 20,000 wives or whatever it is you have. And those aren't satisfying you, and you have to go for that one that you can't have. And so Nathan calls out the king for his bad behavior. And then David is punished by God for this great sin because that son dies. And he mourns. So he made some big errors. But what it does also is it sets up this relationship that we're going to see throughout the kings and the prophets. When there is a bad king, God raises up prophets to speak the role that the king should be doing. So why do we have Jeremiah? Why do we have Isaiah? Why do we have Ezekiel or Hosea or any of these prophets? The idea of the prophets is they are being raised up to speak on behalf of God, the voice of God, because the kings are not doing it. So prophets arise when there are bad kings. And David has a moment of being a bad king and does really awful things. So God raises up Nathan to speak the truth. So Nathan the prophet speaks the truth when David should have been. So that's the idea, and that's a very important episode that we see here, and that we're going to see next week. We're going to read about the kings, and there's lots and lots of bad kings, which means there's lots and lots of prophets because they are all raised up to balance the bad guys. And then Tamar and Amnon. There is another terrible story. So if you want to read about that. But I also just find that interesting because Amnon and Tamar, it's always also hard to figure out the relations of. So let me just introduce the thing here. Tamar and Amnon. It's called The Crime of Amnon in chapter 13. Sometime later, the following incident occurred. David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar. Okay, so that's already confusing because now wait a minute here. David's son Absalom, but Tamar is not referred to her as David's daughter, so that gets kind of confusing. And David's son Amnon loved her. So it's a very strange relationship that we got going on. I can't keep it all straight. I need a diagram or whatever, but they're all kind of related. And Amnon, basically forces himself upon, I don't want to use too bad of words because then I'll get flagged for inappropriate language, but forces himself upon Tamar. And it's awful and it's terrible. And then on top of that, he does that terrible deed and then hates her afterwards. I just think that's really interesting that that's in the Bible because that's often what happens, that there is lust and then you get what you want and now you hate what you wanted and now I throw that person out. Sadly, we see that so often in relationships in today's society. I lust after something and then I get what I want and now I hate myself and I hate you for that. And so now I abuse you further. So that we see that crime kind of first seen here in 2 Samuel. And I think it's worth a spiritual reading because we just see that too often played out in society. Where someone wants something, they get it, and now they feel such remorse and such regret, and then they hate that person. They might murder that person because to get rid of the evidence or whatever. And it's just really, really terrible. But I just mentioned that because it's a terrible, terrible episode. It's right there in the Bible, and it happens in our world today still. So, and then there's the idea of the census, which is interesting because we're in the year 2020. I still need to fill out my paperwork for that matter, but God was not too pleased with the idea of the census because the idea, I believe, is that God alone should know who are his people. And so some people object to a census because, well, only God should know. Well, we need to kind of get over that. It is helpful to have those counts, but then God punishes David, and it's kind of an interesting conversation that we see. Well, which punishment would you like? You choose your punishment. You can have this or this or this. Choose wisely. So again, David starts off great, and he's continually faithful. But he makes mistakes, but then he repents, and so that's a difference between David and Saul. Saul is pretty much a disaster. He is remorseful and he kind of gets back on the path for a little bit, but then he keeps going in the bad path. David, you get the sense that when he makes those mistakes, he comes back to the Lord and he tries to be faithful again, even though there are failures that David has. So David is the greatest king of the kingdom of Israel and Judah. but not as good of a king as Jesus is. Obviously, Jesus is the perfection of the kingship that we see here alluded to, or illuminated by David. So that's basically what happens then in 2 Samuel. So as a broad overview, and that's an hour 15, so a little over, but that's a lot of material to cover in our time. So hopefully that is helpful to give. Just again, the whole purpose of this is to give a little bit of a context, a little bit of an idea, so that hopefully you can go home and read these things with some things there. And then if you have any further confusions or concerns, I had to Google some things like Joab. Now, what is his relationship? Because I was having some trouble even making sense in the commentaries, all those things. And Google Joab. Okay, there it is. So, but this gives some context, hopefully, for what's going on. So next week we will do 1st and 2nd Kings, and then we will get out of the Old Testament for a bit, jump back into the New Testament, do a couple Gospels, and then I still haven't figured out what we're doing after that. But I'm open to suggestions. So I am now going to stop the share. I'm going to come back into here. Richard Nixon and Johnny Cash. Thank you very much. Those are the names I could not think of. So thanks for typing that in. And now let me unmute you all. Now mute you all again and allow you to. So now you're all unmuted. Very good. So are there any questions that have come up there? Nixon and Cash, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, so Terry, your Bible said that was 9 foot tall, feet of Goliath. There we go. Any questions that people have? We got a little bit of time. Thanks, Don. Appreciate that. And thanks, Karen Fisher. I don't see any questions there. I like how there's so many comments. Nixon, Cash.
There we go. When you unmute everybody, for some reason or other, it doesn't unmute me, and I have to go down and do it by myself. That was what happened. Anyway, when I read these kinds of stories in the Old Testament, it comes to me that perhaps what God is trying to tell us is, yes, you're human. Yes, you're going to make mistakes. People have made worse mistakes than you have, and I forgave them. Look at what David did, or, look at what a lot of the other ones did. And I take that as a comfort, because, the Bible says if you even think it, you might as well have done it. Well, good Lord. Yeah. We are all guilty.
Right. Yes, so very good. I think that is a great thing that we can come to is, yeah, I look at my own life and I get some comfort that, I haven't ordered Uriah to the front of the line, but I have done some things that are pretty awful, and God is merciful. God is forgiving. That's a great point for us to consider.
And I will bet you have not raped your half sister either.
I have not.
I'm glad to hear it.
Right. That was the word I was avoiding, just in case I didn't want to get flagged. I don't know how these things work, but I didn't want to water it down too much, but I don't know how these flags work that the YouTube bots come up and say your video is now banned. I don't know, but but I'm glad that you said it there, Karen, that I was just being a little cautious. All right. Any other questions? I do have to get going pretty quickly because I do have the 11 o'clock First Communion Mass, so that's exciting. And then we have a 2 o'clock one as well. So I am doing the 11 o'clock. Father Ashmore is doing the 2 o'clock, but those will be live streamed, I believe is what we were requested to do. So that'll be on. So that means the other one of us is running the camera. So although John's learning that camera pretty well. So we've got a new cameraman as well, John, our seminarian. I don't see any other comments or questions. So hopefully it was clear. People say that it was interesting and helpful. So great. I'm glad to do it. I really enjoy doing this. I enjoy doing the Bible studies. So it's fun for me. Some work, but it's good work. I was thinking yesterday as I was trying to tidy everything up. I'm like, what are you doing on Friday night? I'm reading the Bible. That's what I'm doing. And I'm getting my talk together. So I can't really imagine anything better for me to do on a Friday. So it was good. So thanks for giving me this opportunity, and thanks for listening. And we'll continue to go right along. So First and Second Kings next week, and I've got a lot of work to that. I've never taught on Samuel before, so this is my first time doing that. Some of these classes I've done before, and so I had to tidy up and rethink. And this one I kind of had to start from scratch. And first, I'll be honest. First and Second Kings frightens me a little bit because there's a lot of stuff in there. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to get through with that in an hour, but I'll be working this week to get it ready. So anyway, thanks so much for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you next week. And feel free to spread if you found this helpful, feel free to spread it around on the Facebook or the YouTube if you found that to be helpful. So
thank you very much, Father.
Thanks,
you.
Father.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Tell Father bye.
Bye.
You want to come tell him bye? He can hear you now.
I can.
Hurry up. Hurry up. He's got to go. Hurry up. Okay, tell him bye.
Bye.
Bye. It's good to see you on the computer. Have a good one.
See, he's telling you bye.
Bye. Have a good one. It's good to see you on the computer.
All right, have a good
Bye.
First Communion.
Thank you.